Hello, I'm Peter Day, and in this week's download edition of In Business from BBC Radio 4, the producer Rosamund Jones and I have been hearing about and tasting one of mankind's oldest inventions, beer. I'm in a fairly small brewery in the south of London, close to the River Thames. It's one of what are said to be 1,500 breweries in Britain, many of them very new, an astonishing number. This is the Meantime Brewery in Greenwich, named after the thing that made this place world famous, Greenwich Meantime.
It is a real rags to, inverted commas, riches story.
Nick Miller is the chief executive of the Meantime Brewing Company.
The raw material for a great company was here. We have wonderful product, brewed by our master brewer, Alistair Hook.
The founder.
The founder, yes. He started the company in 2000.
He is a beer fanatic. He left university early to start getting involved in beer, didn't he?
That was his dream. He wanted to be a brewer. And beer became his passion in life. And there is a parallel with myself. I'm not a brewer, but I've been in the beer industry since the age of 21.
And growing was an important component of the whole business plan all the time, from the beginning.
We've grown roughly 10 times in 5 or 6 years.
A business that started 15 years ago is now renowned nationally and internationally. Last May, its distinctive brand and rapid growth attracted a successful takeover bid from the world's second largest beer corporation, SAB Miller. But now, only 8 months later, SAB Miller says it's thinking of putting Meantime up for sale. And this brewery is suddenly in the news with a story that sheds revealing light on the changes the brewing industry worldwide is going through. The great beer upheaval is what this programme is all about. SAB Miller is talking of getting rid of its very recent acquisition in Greenwich because of something much bigger. The company is in the process of being taken over by its global rival called AB InBev. It would embrace brands such as Budweiser, Stella, Corona, Bass, Beck's, and dozens of others. What's going on? A question for Johnny Forsyth, the global drinks expert at the London market research company Mintel.
AB InBev and SAB Miller together have around about a third of the beer volumes around the whole world. So suddenly we've got a significant player, having previously been reasonably fragmented market.
Because these are both companies who've had vast experience of taking over people and merging them already, so they continue the momentum now.
Yeah, and then cutting costs, and they know how to do that. That's what their business model has been focused on.
Now, in many places, beer drinking is actually in decline.
It's mainly in the developed world that beer sales are going down. It tends to be in Western markets where people are actually trying to drink a bit less alcohol. They've got ageing demographics. Japan has been coming down for a long time because Japan's a very ageing market and beer has peaked there. Then almost you've got Europe next and then the US after that.
Young people drink beer, do they?
Yeah, you tend to find that the prime core audience for beer drinking will be younger men, about 18 to 30 years old.
Even so, there's one part of the global beer industry that's growing fast. It's craft beers. They're normally brewed in small quantities, often in tiny breweries. They're normally independent companies and they specialise in quirky, distinctive beers, full of character and a sense of history.
In the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen it explode around the globe. I'm not just talking about the developed world. We've seen it explode in places like Brazil, places like China, all sorts of countries that you wouldn't necessarily expect it. And, that's just going to grow and grow and grow.
There's a particular explosion of craft breweries in Britain. There are now said to be more breweries per head here than anywhere else in the world. Into the welcoming arms of the Blissland Inn, out in the wilds on the edge of Bodmin Moor in Cornwall. The publican is Gary Marshall. He's been in charge here for 21 years.
We've had over 3,000 beers since we've been at different guest ales. There's a scoreboard behind the bar there. It's not quite up to date, but nearly. It says 3,254, and that's the amount of different real ales.
I've drunk most of the beers that we've had here.
Most of the 3,000? You have a favourite?
That is an impossible question, because your favourites change. I like dark beers, I like strong beers. We've had a beer in here 13.5%.
That's too much, isn't it?
Depends how many beers I have.
My phone today, it's a Monday, I must have had 15 phone calls this morning from brewers trying to sell me beer. It's just endless. There are over 20 or 30 breweries now in Cornwall. There's a little brewery down at Pontonouf, and it's a tiny, what they call a nano brewery. I think it's that small. And he's coming to see me next Tuesday. And we'll try their beer. If it's a load of rubbish, we won't have it again. If it's nice, we'll have it again.
Small breweries, they all use their own malts, but the big ones don't use hops, and they're horrible. When I first came here, it was all gassy beer, Double Diamond and Red Barrel and rubbish like that.
But you drank it.
Because there was nothing else.
Beer has a long pedigree, of course, going back thousands of years. One man who's been very involved in its recent history is Michael Hardman. He's one of the founders of the influential organisation Camaro, the Campaign for Real Ale, established 44 years ago. We met in a favourite pub and he told me what the British beer landscape was like when Camaro was launched.
There were 6 major brewing companies: Allied Breweries, Bass, Courage, Scottish in Newcastle, Watney's and Whitbread, and they brewed 80% of the beer that was drunk in Britain and owned more than half the pubs. They were pretty well doing as they wanted because they had big local monopolies, because they'd taken over breweries in almost every town and city.
The picture you describe in the 70s was very much part of the cult of efficiency that swept Britain in the 60s and 70s, wasn't it?
It was indeed. The keg beer that we were objecting to was very easy, and still is very easy, to keep. Any fill with a spanner in a cellar can look after it. It's been filtered and pasteurised and carbonated, and it's a processed product. It's like boiled ham.
That was Britain in the 1970s, but already then something was stirring across the Atlantic, where the beer industry still reflected the impact of prohibition in the 1930s.
I started brewing commercially in 1980, and when we started, there was just a little bit over 40 brewing companies left in America making beer, and that's the largest to the smallest.
Ken Grossman is one of the giants of the craft beer movement. He started brewing at home in the 1970s and went on to co-found a tiny brewery in the college town of Chico, north of San Francisco, in California. It was called the Sierra Nevada Brewery, and it still is 36 years later. Back then, beer in the USA was very different.
There wasn't much choice. Pretty much everybody brewed the same general style of beer, of light lager, so it was about the bottom, I would say, of the scene for beer in the U.S. We knew we needed to produce a product that would differentiate itself, so we focused pretty heavily on a lot of aromatic hops, and the hop we chose was called Cascade, and it was really the first American new aroma hop to hit the market. It was much more pungent with pine and citrus and had quite a bit more aromatic properties than I think most of the brewers at the time were looking for.
As we've heard, Camaro got lots of people in Britain talking about beer 40 years ago. But it seems to have been the example of the rapid development of craft beer in the USA that then propelled the small brewery movement over here. It's said there are 100 in London alone.
My name's Estelle Theobald of Canopy Beer Co.
And you own it?
Yes, me and my husband.
There's the baby.
That's the baby, yeah.
That's part of the story. The baby is part of the story.
Yes, her and her older brother are part of the story. We set up the company to try and have a business that we could run as a family. We started off brewing 2.5 barrels, which is quite a small volume. We're brewing maybe once a week, and then now we are brewing 4 barrels, maybe 4 or 5 times a week. We sell to independent bottle shops, we sell to pubs, cafes, restaurants.
Did you have to go out and sell very hard, or were they waiting for another craft beer?
I'm not much of a salesperson, but I believe that we have a product that is very good and there is a willing market out there for it. So it wasn't a hard sell by any means.
The Canopy Brewery is tucked under a railway arch. Outside there's a space for drinkers to sample the new brews and a canopy protecting them from the South London weather.
You've got there's really a spread of independent brewers that are really operating in an ethical and delicious way. You can't stop this, It's the local thing, yeah.
The fact that it's much smaller rather than your big scale Stella or Foster's or something like that, I think it's really nice.
Early on, we made an adjustment to our labels and we added brewed in Herne Hill, London, which was some feedback that we had from our customers saying people are really keen on local beers. Our most popular beer is Brockwell IPA. We're here next to Brockwell Park. It's about people looking for something that they can buy here, drink here, that they couldn't get 20 miles away, for example. I'd say 95% of the beer goes within a 4-mile radius of here.
Another echo from the brewing past. Until 200 years ago, before the canals and the railways and the industrialisation of Britain, beer was very much a local phenomenon. It was mostly public houses that brewed beer and then sold it to their own customers. Mike Hardman of Camaro remembers how local it still was in his youth in the north of England.
I was born and bred in Warrington, where there were two main breweries. One was Greenall's and one was Walker's, and 2/3 of the town were great fans of Greenall's and 1/3 of the town were great fans of Walker's. Now, if you went to Wigan, you'd get different beers there.
How far away?
12 miles. And I used to go to rugby matches in other towns, and I would delight in drinking some of these beers. I went up to Barrow in Furness. There was a brewery there called Cases, and when I first tasted Cases, I thought I'd found heaven. And it really made journeys to Barrow one of the great things to look forward to every season.
Now to one of the great survivors, a 19th century brewery in Cornwall that avoided the beer amalgamations of the 1970s, St Austell Brewery. The archivist Chris Knight gave me a tour. Where are we now?
We're now coming into the core of the original brew house, which would have been built in around 1889, 1890. So this is still very much the beating heart of the brewery. One of our earliest fermentation vessels is still slate made in Wales, so this would have been shipped down in the 1890s and we still use it today.
The St Austell Brewery is still family owned. It was founded 164 years ago by an ambitious local entrepreneur, William Hicks.
He started off with one pub, the Seven Stars in St Austell, in 1863, but within 7 years he'd been able to raise enough money and capital. He mortgaged the old family farm to buy the London Inn, which was a fine old establishment on the north of the town, and develop that into the county's most modern industrial steam brewery. And of course from there he did sell his ales out through the town and into the wider area of Cornwall, using the infrastructure, the transport infrastructure that was there.
The development of brewers is very, very closely linked to the development of transport, isn't it?
I think you're absolutely right. You're obviously trying to shift a lot of casks. The wider your estate, the bigger your estate, the more you need to transport. So I think from the very earliest days, Walter saw this opportunity as the Great Western Railway came down into Cornwall as a chance of establishing himself wider than St Austell. So we see him developing depots down in Penzance, for example, and developing ties in Truro, and using the rail to carry his ale.
Growth by acquisition came later, did it?
Most of the acquisitions you see from this early stage are gradual takeovers of a business, a mutual agreement. This is really strongly exemplified in 1916 when we take over Huxtables of Newquay. And like most brewers in the First World War, our sales were dipping precariously because Lloyd George said ale was a greater enemy than the Germans.
The defence of the Railmite was particularly put on to stop beer being available day and night, wasn't it?
That's absolutely true.
But you're still talking about a universe which is very closely bounded by the coast. This is very Cornish story still. You're trapped in Cornwall, aren't you?
We are indeed, and that's very much the case until relatively recent times.
The St Austell Brewery has grown slowly but steadily over the past decade, seeing off local rivals. And in 1999 it brewed a beer during the total solar eclipse in Cornwall. That was so popular that, under the name Tribute, it then became St Austell's bestseller all over the country.
We did not want to just be brewing beer for the Cornish. I mean, of course, that's a key part of our market, but we wanted to explore the wider world. We felt we had a product that could go further.
James Staunton is the managing director of the St Austell Brewery. He happens to be the great-great-grandson of the founder, William Hicks.
We've just, much to our very pleasant surprise, brewed 100,000 barrels in a year, and our 5-year forecasts are now hinting that we could touch 150,000. Now, that's a very bold forecast, but that is from my senior management team who have not been threatened by not doing it. That is their take on life.
You've got St Austell on the label. Maybe if you wanted to expand really fast, you could get somebody else to brew St Austell beer somewhere else, couldn't you?
We could, but we're not. That's a very easy question to answer. We don't want to lose that identity. It's a very, very strong part of our offer. We see no reason to do that.
Localness, this local story. Does it really matter? Surely the only thing in the end that matters about beer is what it tastes like.
Yes, but no, I disagree, because I think it's part of a package. I think the taste is the base of it, but actually it's all part of the romance, is the connection with where it comes from and the association of that town, village, county, country. I think that's all part of the story, and I think it's all part of the brand, and it's what turns people on. It's what makes them loyal and stay with products.
St Austell thinks of itself as part of the craft brewing movement. It wants to expand, but not hugely. It's a dilemma that many new brewers face, to grow or not to grow. Their appeal and their branding is often very local and small, and that's the attraction to the adventurous drinker. Very black. It smells black too, doesn't it?
The dark beers we make are pretty much all to old London recipes.
Evan O'Riordan is the founder of the Colonel Brewery, run from another railway arch in South London.
This recipe is whatever, 130 years old. It reminds us of our place in something that's bigger than us, you know.
This brewery is 6 years old and sees itself as part of the new enthusiasm for organic handmade food. Before setting up in beer, Evan O'Riordan worked for one of the best-known cheese retailers in Britain.
I was selling cheese for Neal's Yard Dairy. They had a customer over in the States who needed help setting up a cheese shop, so I got sent over there for a couple of months to help this customer, which was amazing because I spent all day eating and talking about cheese. And then, you know, in the evenings, they'd take me out for a beer and they'd teach me all about the beer we were drinking.
So you encountered local micro craft beer in New York?
Yeah, and it made perfect sense to me because regarding cheese, you know, I would be able to tell everybody, well, who's the name of the cheesemaker, what type of animals, you know, what pastures they're eating on, what's the recipe they're using. When I was going out drinking, then somebody would be able to tell me the same things about this beer. And so the entire mindset was something I understood. It's just not something I'd ever seen applied to beer over here.
So you came back with an idea?
Yes, I did. I kind of feel like big cities are kind of linked closer to each other than necessarily to the heartland of the country around them. So, you know, the links between, say, London and New York are huge. And I knew that that sort of type of person in New York was very similar to the people here.
This particular brewery is part of a cluster of like-minded food craftspeople housed in railway arches in Bermondsey, and they know each other well.
The business is can I say it's a secondary concern? I think I can. I mean, the atmosphere in the brewery is great and everybody working here wants to be here, so you know, nobody would ever let anybody else down on anything. So we can all drive the forklift, we all answer the telephone, people rotate in terms of what they do each day.
You can all brew?
Yeah, we can all brew. Once you've looked after the people working here and once you've looked after the beer, I tend to think that the rest of it, you know, looks after itself to a degree.
So how do you think about growth then? Do you have a business plan, or are you driven by wanting to make more varieties, or what?
There isn't an impetus here on our side at the moment to get any bigger. I mean, that would make more beer, and that would also make a lot more work, and it could be quite a stressful thing. Do we need more money, and do we want to work harder? Our consensus now is that there's a little bit of space for a few more tanks, perhaps, but not much. That's the physical limits of our space. If we wanted to expand, then we would have to probably move to another bigger unit somewhere else. But then you see, this is our family and our community around here. And actually, it would be so much preferable if there were lots of relatively small breweries around the place than having, you know, a big company that was dominant in a certain market.
Are the big brewers irrelevant to you?
No. I mean, do I pay much attention to what they do? No, it makes me often far too angry to think about it in detail.
As some of the smallest brewers fret about how large they may be tempted to become, at the other end of the market, the giant beer companies are wondering how they ought to react to the growing popularity of this small-scale craft beer. Back to Mintel's global drinks expert, Johnny Forsyth.
It's massively worrying them. They didn't quite realise what a big threat it was, and they didn't really do anything because they thought it's just a small speck.
Curiosity.
Nothing to get too worried about. That, was the wrong approach. Now they're in a bit of a quandary. How do they react to it? Because, a lot of people want to buy craft beers made by small companies. So you've immediately got a huge contradiction if you're a mega brewer.
Most recently, there's been quite a few sales of small brewers to the largest breweries in the world in order to, be able to offer a craft beer into their distribution network.
Ken Grossman, the American craft ale pioneer at Sierra Nevada.
It's gotten a bit more complicated lately with some brewers being bought completely outright by the largest brewers and then those beers being produced in some cases in their large breweries. It's why we got into the business, because we wanted to make our own beer, and we'll see how the industry evolves from here on out.
But now the global giants are getting an appetite for craft beer makers in other parts of the world. Brazil is the world's third largest beer market, and 98% of that is still lager. But craft beer is a growing minority interest, and one of the Brazilian pioneers is José Filippi Camaro. His father runs a fast food business in the southern city of Belo Horizonte, and he built a microbrewery to make beer for his customers. In 2006, his son José began experimenting with new tastes and founded the Val's Brewery.
It was a tough beginning on the business. Our first beer, like a pale ale, we have to throw it away because nobody enjoyed. They like light lager beer in Brazil.
As the company started to grow, it came to the attention of the world's largest brewing group, AB InBev. Last February, the global giant bought this Brazilian minnow.
Together with AB, we can do everything that we always dream. We can be an airplane that flies much faster now.
Are you still in charge?
Yeah, they created this division that we call Disruptive Growth Division in AB. And he takes care of every single craft beer by AB. And this division gives us the opportunity to continue to do everything that we want. And he just helped us to make this faster and more effective.
Are you now rich?
I'm always rich. If I'm still producing beer, I'm totally rich.
And that story brings us back to Greenwich in South London, where this programme began. It's the 15-year-old brewery bought in May by the world's second largest brewer, which may soon become part of the world's biggest brewing group. A sellout, Chief Executive Nick Miller?
We felt that partnering with a much bigger brewer would enable us to achieve some of the objectives that we set ourselves far more easily. So, for example, they have a distribution base right across the world that we could tap into. It was also a great time to give our shareholders, some of which have been in for 15 years, a return. We also felt that we would like to expand our business from 100,000 hectolitres to 250,000 hectolitres. And we felt after 15 years we would rather back into a big brewer who would provide us with that funding and financial clout, which of course SAB have duly done.
How much did you sell the company for?
I'm sorry, that's off the record.
That's a secret?
That's a secret, yeah.
OK. Were you as a board worried that people who supported you as a small brewer might abandon you because of the ownership, the new ownership?
We were always aware that a small minority may take the sniffy route of big is bad. Some were a little bit miffed at this, but we haven't seen a slowdown in sales. We felt that if we continued producing our beers to the same quality standards, using the same brewing process that we have for the last 15 years, I think the trade talks an awful lot more about ownership than the average drinker does on the street. Nothing's changed other than we've got a new set of shareholders.
At the moment, you've got a new set of shareholders, but we've just had the news that SAB Miller, embroiled in a great big merger which will make it the largest beer corporation in the world, or the merged company, is thinking of putting Meantime up for sale to meet the competition regulators' requirements in Europe and maybe in America as well. So you're a pinball now being flicked about the board, aren't you?
No. We don't feel like a pinball.
Could be anybody buys you now.
It could be anybody. It's just a different shareholder. We had 70 shareholders up until May. We've now got one called SAB Miller. We may have another one in due time. Until that changes, it's business as usual.
Although you've got a very local name, you've kind of outgrown that. You don't just deliver by dray horse anymore, do you?
No, we export to over 40 countries around the world. Meantime, it's very lucky that our local market is, over 10 million people strong. London is bigger than a lot of countries. We can touch a lot of drinkers with our product relatively easily. But because we are from London, that is a massive, massive brand name. Meantime, from London does have an awful lot of provenance and history associated to it, which we're very fortunate to have as part of the DNA of our brand.
Now, that's the way big companies tend to talk. Back to Ken Grossman at Sierra Nevada. He's now personally worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but the company is still in his hands. Decade by decade, slowly and steadily, it's grown into a beer now available all over the world.
We were a bit opportunistic in how we distributed our beer, and when we had an inquiry from a distributor in Chicago or New York or Boston or some part of the country that was receptive to what we were doing on the beer side, we would take advantage of that.
Operating now, though, on a scale which is wildly larger than you started, are you really still a craft brewery? Aren't you just a brewery pursuing a different sort of taste from the mainstream?
No, we feel very much that we're a craft brewer. We do pretty much exactly what we did when we started.
This great big merger, the current great big merger, is obviously going to lead to rivals merging as well. Is there a danger of going back to the 1970s now?
I don't think there's a danger of going back to the 70s. I think now that people have tasted great beers, I don't think we're going to be back to a homogeneous single style of beer. I don't see that happening.
That, of course, is what a brewer hopes. But taste, like everything else, can change. It's happened before, says the market survey man from Mintel.
In alcohol, we always see cycles of behaviour, because essentially alcohol is about fashion a lot of the time, and it's also about reacting against what your parents drank. The mindset now is that people want to be much more individualistic, and they're more likely to say that they drink a beer that no one's ever heard of rather than a beer that everyone drinks. So often a new generation will try and forge their own path, and that's why it tends to be so reactionary.
You mean craft beer is going to seem all fuddy-duddy to, my grandchildren when they grow up and drink?
And I think, at the moment craft beer is very exciting. It's like a breath of fresh air. But imagine what it could be like in 20 years. Everyone will be claiming that they're a craft beer. You could easily see how something that is incredibly cool at the moment could be a lot less cool.
Johnny Forsyth with a sobering thought. Cheers.